The creek ran black under the pines, thick with runoff and the smell of wet shale. Up the switchback trail, past the rusted mailbox that still read COLE in crooked iron letters nobody left alive could spell, the cabin crouched like something that had learned to breathe through its boards. Inside, the only light came from a coal stove and the occasional blue flare of a kerosene lamp when someone remembered to trim the wick. The holler had no real name anymore, just a notch in the ridge where the county road gave up and turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to nothing at all. Pines grew so thick the sun came down in splinters, and the only clock was the slow drip of resin from wounded bark. Down at the foot of the slope, the creek hissed over rocks the color of dried blood. Up higher, where the trail bent like a broken finger, the coal place leaned into the hillside as though the mountain itself had exhaled it there 100 years ago and forgotten to take it back. Inside, the air tasted of coal smoke and wet dog and something older, something that clung to the rafters like a second skin. Arlene sat on the edge of the iron bed she had shared with her mother until 3 weeks ago, knees drawn up under a quilt gone gray from too many washings in creek water. Her mama had died on the kitchen table, legs open to the room, blood running off the pine planks in steady pulses while Enoch pressed a folded feed sack between her thighs and told her to push one more time, just one more, darlin', like a baby was still possible after the cord had knotted itself twice around a neck that never drew breath. They put the dead child in a shoebox lined with one of Enoch's old flannel shirts. Arlene dug the hole herself behind the smokehouse, nails splitting on shale, while her father watched from the porch with the shotgun across his knees in case the revenuers came sniffing. When she tamped the last shovelful of dirt, Enoch said, "That's done," the way another man might say grace. After that, the cabin grew quieter than it had ever been. The dogs quit barking at shadows. The chickens pecked circles in the dust and forgot to lay. Arlene moved through the rooms like a ghost learning its own house, setting plates for two that only one hand ever touched. Enoch watched her the way a man watches fire he's already decided to step into. On the night it happened, the wind came down off the ridge hard enough to rattle the tin roof like loose teeth. The stove had burned low, only a single lump glowed the color of a dying heart. Arlene was scrubbing the blood stain on the kitchen table with lye soap and a bristle brush, though the wood had drunk the stain too deep to ever come clean. She heard her father's boots behind her, slow, deliberate, the same rhythm he used when he walked the ridge line hunting deer. She kept scrubbing. His shadow fell across the table first, long and thick, swallowing the lamplight. Then his hand settled on the back of her neck, thumb pressing the soft hollow beneath her hair. The touch was warm, almost kind. He smelled of sour mash and wood smoke and the particular musk that lived under his arms after a day splitting locust. When he spoke, his voice carried the mountain drawl that made every word feel older than the trees. "Your mama's gone to her rest," he said. "Ain't right for a man to be alone in his own house. Ain't natural." Arlene's hands stilled in the gray water. She was small for 14, ribs showing when she bathed in the creek, hip bones sharp enough to cut paper. She had her mother's black hair and the pale coal eyes that looked near white in certain lights. Enoch's thumb traced a slow circle at her nape, the way he once stroked the ears of hunting dogs to calm them before setting them on a scent. She thought about running then. Thought about the door not 6 feet away, the night beyond it, the trail that twisted down through laurel slicks to nowhere a girl could hide. She thought about the shotgun on its pegs above the mantel and how heavy it was when she cleaned it for him every Sunday. She thought about the way her mama had screamed toward the end, high and thin, like a rabbit with its leg caught. Enoch's other hand came to rest on her shoulder, fingers spread wide, claiming. "Blood needs keepin'," he murmured against her ear. "Cold blood especially. Been leavin' us too long, tricklin' off into strangers. Time to call it home." He turned her gently, the way a man turns a hinge that already knows which way it must go. The lamplight caught the wet in his eyes, grief or hunger, impossible to tell. Arlene looked up into the face that had loomed above her cradle, that had carried her on his shoulders to pick blackberries when she was small enough to believe the world ended at the ridge line. The face that had closed her mother's eyes with the same 2 fingers now brushing her cheek. She did not cry. She had learned already that tears only made him kinder, and kindness was the most dangerous thing he owned. When he lifted her, she weighed nothing in his arms. The bed creaked under them both, Spring singing the same tired note they had sung for her parents every night of her childhood. The quilt still smelled of her mother's sassafras and blood. Enoch's beard scraped her throat as he whispered the old words, half hymn, half curse, about seeds returning to the furrow, about rivers running back uphill to their source. Afterward, he held her the way he once held her after nightmares, one heavy arm across her chest, palm cupped over the small breast just beginning to bud. He fell asleep quick, breath whistling through his nose like wine through a cracked door. Arlene lay staring at the ceiling, at the water stain shaped like a hand reaching down. Somewhere outside, an owl asked its question once, then thought better of an answer. In the hush that followed, she felt the first true seed take root, not in her belly yet, but deeper, in the place where a soul either hardens or breaks. The mountain listened. The pines kept their counsel. And the creek kept running black, carrying whatever was left of mercy far away from the holler where Arlene Cole learned the exact weight of blood calling itself home. The first sign came in the way the dresses stopped fitting. Arlene woke one morning to find the top button of her everyday calico gaping like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. She stood in front of the cracked mirror nailed to the back of the bedroom door and watched her body betray her in slow motion. The gentle curve beneath her pinafore had become a hard, undeniable mound, rising as if something inside had decided to push its way out into the light whether she allowed it or not. She pressed both palms against it, half expecting to feel a hoof or a claw or the ridged brow of something that should never have been conceived. Instead there was only a faint flutter, like a trapped moth beating against the walls of her skin. She stood there until her arms ached, waiting for shame to flood in and drown her. It never came. What came instead was a cold, clear knowledge. The thing growing inside her was the only part of Enoch that could not lie to her face. Downstairs, Enoch noticed the same morning. He was at the stove frying fatback, the grease popping like tiny gunshots. When Arlene stepped into the kitchen he didn't speak, only let his eyes travel from her face to the swell beneath her apron and back again. A slow smile worked its way across his mouth, the kind that started in the beard and ended somewhere behind the eyes. He set the fork down, wiped his hands on the rag tucked in his belt, and crossed the room in 3 strides. His palms settled over the curve of her belly with the reverence men usually save for Bibles or rifles. The heat of him soaked through the thin cloth. "There it is," he said, voice rough with something that might have been pride. "Coal comin' back to coal. Pure as creek water afore it hits the valley." That was the day the mountain began to celebrate. Word travels strange in the hollers. No telephones, no mail except what the rural carrier tossed from his Jeep window once a week, yet by nightfall every cabin from Pine Log to Buzzard Roost knew Arlene Cole was carrying her daddy's get. Women who hadn't climbed the ridge since her mama's burying appeared at the door with mason jars of blackberry jam thick as axle grease, with quilts pieced from feed sack scraps, with tiny knitted caps no bigger than a man's fist. They pressed these offerings into Arlene's hands and stared at her middle with shining eyes. "Blessin'," they kept saying, over and over, like a charm against the world outside. A true blessin'. Old Granny Holcomb, who claimed to remember when the first Cole crossed the ridge with nothing but a rifle and a Bible bound in raccoon hide, sat in the rocker by the stove and told stories no one had asked to hear. How the Coles once owned half the county before taxes and lawyers and soft valley ways stole it all. How every generation since had married thinner and thinner blood until now, finally, the line was folding back on itself like a snake swallowing its tail. "Purity," she croaked, gums shining wet and pink. "That's what the Lord intended all along." Enoch soaked it up like corn liquor. He carved a cradle from a single yellow poplar log, planing the wood so smooth it looked wet. He hung it from the rafters with rawhide strips and rocked it empty every evening, humming the same tuneless hymn his own father had hummed over him. When neighbors came by with a ham or a poke of brown sugar, he greeted them on the porch like a preacher receiving tithes, hand resting possessively on Arlene's shoulder, fingers spread wide enough to cover the nape of her neck and half her collarbone both. At night he talked to the belly. Not to Arlene, past her, through her, as if her body had become nothing more than a speaking tube for the child within. He told it about the land that would be his one day, about the coal seams nobody had found yet, about how no sheriff or judge or preacher from down below would ever set foot on coal soil again once the circle closed proper. Sometimes his voice dropped so low Arlene felt the words vibrate against her spine. The women taught her things. How to steep red raspberry leaf for the sickness. How to bind her breasts with strips of old sheeting when the milk came in. How to breathe through the first pains when they started low in the back and curled around like hot wire. They spoke of the baby as if it were already walking among them. Little Enoch, they called it, never once asking what name Arlene might choose. The name was decided the way the phases of the moon are decided, inevitable, ancient, already written in blood too thick to wash away. Arlene listened and nodded and said yes ma'am when required. She learned to smile with her mouth while her eyes stayed flat and winter pale. She learned to rock in the chair beside the stove and feel the weight inside her shift and kick and stretch like a colt testing the walls of its stall. Sometimes, when the cabin was empty and the wind moaned through the chinking, she pressed her lips to the taut skin and whispered the only prayer she still remembered from childhood, "Deliver me." She never specified from what. Outside, the leaves turned and fell. Frost silvered the pumpkin vines. The cradle hung waiting, yellow wood glowing like a lantern in the dark. And every night Enoch laid his head against the swell of her and listened to the heartbeat that belonged to them both, his smile wider than the holler itself, certain at last that the mountain had given him back everything it ever took. The pains came on a night so cold the creek froze in long glassy ribbons and the pines cracked like rifle shots when the sap burst inside them. Arlene had been splitting kindling on the porch when the first one hit, a fist twisting deep in her back that buckled her knees and sent the axe clattering. Enoch found her there, doubled over the chopping block, breath-fogging white. He didn't ask if it was time, he simply lifted her the way he once lifted her mother, arms under her shoulders and thighs, and carried her inside where the stove roared like something alive. He sent the women away with a single look. Granny Holcomb opened her mouth to protest. Birth was women's dominion, always had been, but Enoch's eyes were flat and bright as new nickels. The door shut on their worried faces, the latch falling with a sound like a judge's gavel. After that there was only the wind, the stove, and the two of them in the small circle of lamplight. Arlene's memories of the hours that followed came in shards. The table again, same blood-stained pine where her mother had died. Enoch rolling up his sleeves, forearms thick as fence posts, veins standing out like blue ropes. The smell of lye soap and hot iron as he boiled water in the big enamel pot. His voice, low and steady, telling her to bear down, "Girl, bear down like your mama taught you," though her mama had never taught her anything except how to die quiet. She screamed once, a sound torn out of her so raw it felt like turning inside out. Enoch slapped her, not hard, just enough to bring her back. "Save it," he said. "You'll need that breath." The room tilted and blurred. Sweat ran into her eyes until the world was nothing but salt and fire. She felt herself splitting open, the way a log splits when the heart finally gives. Something hot and impossible slid from her body in a rush of blood and water that steamed when it hit the cold floorboards. Then silence, deeper than any she had ever known. Enoch worked quickly, practiced. He tied the cord with baling twine boiled soft, cut it with the skinning knife he kept stropped sharp enough to shave with. Wrapped the child in the same flannel shirt that had lined the shoebox grave 18 months earlier. Only then did he lift the bundle to the light. The baby didn't cry. He opened his eyes, pale, almost colorless, the exact shade of creek ice at dawn, and looked straight into Enoch's face. Recognition flickered there, ancient and terrible, as if the soul inside had been waiting a long time for this particular body. Along each tiny hand, where fingers should have ended, there grew an extra nub, soft and pink, already budding a miniature nail. Polydactyly, the old women would call it later, the old coal sign, proof the blood remembered itself. Enoch's breath caught. He turned the child so Arlene could see. "Look," he whispered, voice trembling with something close to prayer. "He's marked true. 6 on each hand, just like my granddaddy, just like the first Enoch that come over the ridge with nothing but the devil at his heels." Arlene reached out. Her arms shook so badly Enoch had to guide them. The baby weighed almost nothing, yet felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. His skin was translucent, veins showing blue beneath. When she brushed the extra digits they curled reflexively, tiny fists closing around her fingertip like creeper vine around a sapling. She felt the pull of it then, the same pull she had felt the night her father first laid hands on her, blood calling to blood, refusing to let go. Enoch leaned close, beard brushing her cheek, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his face. "Name him," he said. "Name him proper." She tried to speak and found her throat full of rust. The baby's eyes never left hers. In them she saw the cabin, the mountain, the long chain of pale-eyed coals stretching back into the dark like paper dolls cut from the same rotten cloth. She saw the cradle waiting upstairs, the yellow poplar glowing. She saw the circle closing, tighter and tighter, until there was no space left for anything that wasn't coal. "Enoch," she croaked. The name tasted like pennies and creek water. Little Enoch. Her father, no, their father, made a sound low in his chest, half laugh, half sob. He pressed his forehead to the baby's, then to hers, sealing the three of them together in one slick breath of blood and milk and wood smoke. Outside, the wind died sudden as a snapped neck. The stove popped once, sending up a shower of sparks that lit the room red for the length of a heartbeat. In that heartbeat Arlene understood she was no longer daughter alone. She was mother now, and sister, and something older still, vessel, keeper, the living hinge on which the door of the holler swung shut forever. The baby made a small noise, not quite a cry, more like a sigh of recognition. His extra fingers flexed against her breast, already reaching for what came next. The years slid by like creek stones under ice, silent and grinding. Little Enoch grew tall the way a weed grows tall when nothing prunes it, fast, pale, joints too big for the skin stretched over them. By 6 he had the same wide shoulders his father had, the same colorless eyes that caught lamplight and threw it back colder. The extra fingers never fell away as some babies do, they lengthened, knuckles forming, nails hard as horn. He used all 12 without thinking, picking up kindling, skinning squirrels, turning the pages of the Foxed family Bible that no one read but everyone swore by. Arlene watched the resemblance settle on him the way frost settles on a windowpane, one crystal at a time until the whole world outside is locked away. When he laughed, which was rare, it came out in Enoch's same rolling bark. When he was angry, the vein stood out in his forehead exactly where it stood out in the men who had sired them both. Some night she woke to find him standing at the foot of her bed, moonlight cutting across his face, and for one heart-stopping moment could not tell which Enoch looked back at her. The grooming began so softly she almost missed it. First it was the bathing. Enoch carried the tin tub in from the porch every Saturday night, set it before the stove, poured bucket after bucket of boiling water until steam filled the room like fog off the creek. He washed the boy himself, big hands moving slow over narrow ribs, thumbs tracing the ridge of extra knuckles the way another man might trace a scar he was proud of inflicting. "Strong hands," he'd murmur. "Coal hands. 12 fingers to hold what's ours." Little Enoch sat still as a possum playing dead, eyes fixed on the stove lid, lips pressed thin. Only once did he look toward Arlene where she stood at the kitchen door pretending to peel potatoes. In that look was something ancient asking to be let out of a cage too small for it. Then came the sleeping arrangements. The loft ladder creaked more often after dark. Enoch said the boy had nightmares, needed his paw close. Arlene lay in the big bed alone, quilt pulled to her chin, listening to the low rumble of voices overhead, the occasional soft thud of a hand on bare skin that might have been comfort and might not. She told herself it was fatherly, told herself the mountain way was different, told herself anything that kept her from walking upstairs with the skinning knife. Enoch began taking the boy hunting at dawn, the two of them disappearing into the laurel before the coffee finished perking. They came back after full dark, Enoch carrying a deer across his shoulders, little Enoch dragging the entrail sack, both of them streaked with blood that looked black under the moon. At supper Enoch fed the boy from his own fork, venison and cornbread and sorghum, wiping the child's mouth with a thumb he then licked clean. "Taste that," he'd say. "That's coal land in your belly. Ain't no part of you that don't belong to this mountain now." He started the lessons in earnest the spring little Enoch turned 6.5. Lessons no primer taught. They happened in the barn, door barred from inside, or deep in the laurel thicket where even the crows couldn't see. Arlene found the signs, a smear of blood on the boy's underdrawers when she did laundry, the way he flinched if a hand came too quick toward his face, the careful distance he began keeping from her, as if closeness itself had turned poisonous. One evening she came upon them behind the smokehouse. Enoch had the boy pressed against the log wall, one thick forearm across narrow shoulders, speaking low and urgent into his ear. Little Enoch's face was turned away, but Arlene saw the tremor running through him, saw the way his 12 fingers curled into fists so tight the extra ones overlapped like claws. Enoch's free hand rested low on the boy's belly, fingers splayed wide in that same possessive gesture he'd used on her years before. She must have made a sound. Both heads snapped toward her. For one clear second the three of them stood frozen, framed by the dying light, the mountain itself holding its breath. Then Enoch smiled, slow and sure, and said, "Boy's learnin' where he come from, Arlene. Learnin' how the blood keeps itself warm." Little Enoch's eyes met hers across the darkening yard. In them she saw her own reflection at 14, the same trapped animal understanding that the trap had always had another set of jaws waiting inside the first. His lips moved, shaping a single word she could not hear over the sudden roar in her ears, "Mama." Or maybe it was mercy. With Enoch watching, it was impossible to tell the difference. That night the wind came down off the ridge carrying winter in its teeth. Arlene sat at the kitchen table long after the lamps burned out, sharpening the skinning knife against the whetstone until the blade sang. Overhead, the loft boards creaked in their familiar rhythm, father and son, grandfather and grandson, the same blood circling tighter and tighter like a noose pulled by invisible hands. She listened until the creaking stopped, until the only sound was the soft whisper of steel on stone and the slow, deliberate beating of her heart counting down to something none of them had a name for yet. The night it all came to was the first hard freeze of November, the kind that turns the creek to iron and makes the cabin boards scream as they shrink. Arlene sat at the kitchen table with the skinning knife across her knees, whetstone finally set aside, the blade so sharp it seemed to drink the lamplight instead of reflect it. Little Enoch, no longer little, 14 now, all long bone and pale eye and 12 restless fingers, had been sent to bed early, though sleep was a lie they all still told each other. Upstairs, the loft was quiet for once. Too quiet. Enoch had gone out at dusk saying he had to check the traps, but his coat still hung on the peg and his boots still sat by the stove, drying mud flaking off in black curls. She knew where he was. She had seen the signs gathering like storm clouds, the way Enoch looked at the boy lately, not with the proud hunger he once turned on her, but with something colder, measuring. The way he spoke of one more fold and closing the circle for good. The way little Enoch had begun sleeping in the barn loft with the hounds, claiming the hay smelled better than the cabin, though the hounds snarled whenever he came near now. The way his wrists bore bruises shaped exactly like a man's thumb and 4 fingers. Arlene rose so quietly the chair didn't scrape. She slipped the knife into the sheath zone inside her skirt pocket, the one her mother had used for paring apples and, once, for cutting the cord that killed her. The stairs didn't creak under her weight, she knew every loose board the way a condemned man knows the steps to the gallows. At the top she paused, listening. From the big bedroom came the low murmur of Enoch's voice, persuasive as wrought, and beneath it the softer sound of a boy trying not to cry. She pushed the door open with 2 fingers. Moonlight spilled through the single window, silvering the room. Enoch knelt on the quilt, shirt unbuttoned, beard brushing the bare chest of his son who was also his grandson. Little Enoch lay on his back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, lips bloodless. His nightshirt was rucked up to his armpits, ribs showing white as picked bones. Enoch's hand moved slow between the boy's thighs, coaxing, teaching, claiming the last inch of ground the bloodline needed to own itself completely. Arlene felt the world narrow to a single bright point, the knife in her pocket, the pulse in her throat, the soft wet sound of Enoch's breathing. He sensed her the way a wolf senses the trap spring. His head came up, eyes catching the moon and throwing it back red. For a moment no one moved. Then Enoch smiled, the same tender smile he had given her the night he first took her, and said, "Come on in, darlin'. Plenty of room. Time you both learned how deep the root goes." Little Enoch turned his head then. The look he gave her was not pleading, it was recognition. 2 animals in the same snare, finally seeing the chain was forged from their own bones. His 12 fingers twitched once, then stilled. In that stillness Arlene saw the choice laid bare. She could finish what the mountain had started, step forward, open her legs, let the circle swallow them all whole and seal the holler forever against the outside world. Or she could cut the chain right there, even if the blade took her own hand with it. Enoch shifted, rising to his knees, pants unlaced, ready to welcome her into the lesson. His shadow covered the boy like a lid closing on a coffin. He reached for her with the same hand that had rocked cradles and tied cords and buried babies in shoeboxes, fingers spread wide enough to span a lifetime of sins. Arlene drew the knife. The blade made no sound coming free, only a soft sigh, like the mountain itself exhaling a secret it had kept since the first coal set foot on the ridge. Moonlight ran down the steel the way blood would soon run. Enoch's eyes tracked the motion, and for the first time in all the years she had known him, the smile faltered. Behind him, little Enoch drew one shuddering breath that sounded almost like relief. She stepped forward. The floorboards did not creak. The wind outside had died entirely, as though the night itself leaned in to watch. 3 heartbeats filled the room, hers, steady as a drum calling warriors to battle, Enoch's, quickening with something that might have been fear if he had ever learned the word, and the boy's, fluttering wild like a moth against glass. Arlene raised the knife until its point rested just beneath the beard that had scraped her throat the night her childhood ended. Enoch's throat worked once, Adam's apple bobbing against the blade. He opened his mouth, to command, to cajole, to quote scripture twisted into justification, but no sound came. The circle hung suspended in that instant, perfect and terrible, waiting for her to decide whether it would close like a wedding ring or break like a neck. Her hand did not shake. The mountain held its breath. And somewhere deep in the laurel, an owl finally found the courage to ask its question again, voice carrying clear across the frozen holler, waiting with the patience of stone for whatever answer blood would give.